me, congregating the car park outside, and obviously we will account for everybody on Newland car park. Otherwise, water available as per usual. We're all suitably distanced, even though the regulations are saying that we can do whatever with regard to COVID, but we are keeping ourselves fairly well apart, and I'm assuming that everyone is well and healthy in the chamber. Seeing nobody saying otherwise, excellent. Officers present at the meeting: Robert Close, Democratic Services Officer; Jan Gibson, Programme Leader, Minor Works and Traffic; Kim Robertson, Legal; Neil McBride, Head of Planning. And we'll obviously have a couple of dial-ins via Teams later on. Councillor Adam Stokes to deal with Grantham South, Councillor M and N Clark, local members to Hartsholme and St Giles respectively, and Andrew Watt, a planning agent from May's Planning Solutions, who's registered to speak on item 5.1. Moving on then, onto the agenda. Item 1 is apologies for absence. List of apologies have been offered. We've got apologies today from Councillors Macy, Newton and Reid. No replacements have been made, so that's okay. Item 2 is declaration of councillors' interests. Members can declare any relevant interest now or at any stage during the meeting. If something crops up, please feel free to just wave at me and we will declare those interests. But these are obviously the items that haven't been declared on your declaration of pecuniary interests. Anything else, if you feel you wish to declare, please do so. Minutes from the previous meeting, I'm quite happy to move them. These are the minutes from the 6th of December. You've seen them. Thank you, Councillor Pepper, willing to second them. I'll move on to the next item, which takes me into the traffic reports. And the first one is item 4.1, Bell Street, Edward Street, proposed no waiting at any time. So with that, I now call on Jan Gibson to present the report. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The first report today relates to Bell Street in Lincoln. Next slide, please.
Hold fire.
Thank you.
Right, we can now see the slides. Okay.
So Bell Street, situated off Lincoln High Street, within the terraced housing. Next slide, please. We've had reports from the police that parking very close to the junction of Bell Street and Edward Street is causing difficulties for access for residents and vehicles in general. Next slide, please, Rob. The photos illustrate how close people are parking to the junction. So if you just go back to Appendix B, please. We're proposing to extend the existing double yellow lines shown in blue around the junctions as shown in red. So we've had one objection to this. The resident says that parking is very difficult in the area, and these restrictions will further compromise parking and result in people having to park further away and walk some distance back to their property. We acknowledge this objection and that the fact that this will displace 3 to 4 vehicles, but the only access into Edward Street is via Bell Street, and it's important that this junction is kept clear. The police have asked us to look at this, so our proposal and recommendation is that the objection is overruled. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to look to the committee. Many years ago, about 40 years ago, I used to own a little bit of property in this vicinity, so I do know the area well. I don't own that property now, I will point that out. But I do know the area well, and I do know how tight the car parking is in certain locations. So I'm quite happy to move the recommendation. Would anybody like to speak to the report, or Councillor Skinner?
Quite happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? Okay, it's therefore proposed and seconded. All in favour, please show now. That is unanimous, but I will say Anybody against? Any abstentions? It gives you an opportunity. No, that one's therefore carried. Thank you very much. So carried as printed. Next application then takes us to item 4.2, Tattershallthorpe B1192, proposed 30 and 40 mile an hour speed limits. Again, the floor is yours, Jan.
Thank you. So extensions to the existing 30 mile an hour limits and new 40 mile an hour limits to the north and south of Tattershallthorpe have been proposed. Appendixes B and C show the new 30s and 40s proposed. We have had an objection following public advertisement of the proposals. The objector maintains that funding for these works would be better spent on carriageway maintenance. The selection of roads to be repaired is subject to a data-led approach, and these roads don't meet those criteria. However, the criteria of the speed limit policy are met for these new speed limits, and they will have a positive impact on the village environment. It is therefore recommended that the objection is overruled. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll take you down memory lane again. And many years ago, I used to attend a school in Horncastle, and I know this area very well. So I'm quite supportive of the speed limits. I do know the areas, so we'll put them forward from there. Vice Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm, first of all, the local member for this part of the world, and I drive this route quite frequently whenever I drove it this morning, and I would say without hesitation that this is something which local people in Tattershallthorpe have wanted and do want to see take place. It will bring a tangible benefit to the people living there. It'll also bring a tangible benefit to that junction with Paul's Lane, and I would heartily urge colleagues to overrule that objection. Appreciate local residents would always love us to spend more money on road services, but what we have on the table here is a really, really good scheme that has really good benefits, and I would move, Mr. Chairman, that objection is overruled.
Okay, in which case, if you're moving, I will second it for you. Okay, two sets of hands up. Councillor Skinner, followed by Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I quite often travel that route, and this scheme is really, really sensible. Yes, I would share the same concerns at the road surface as the residents, but this is about safety, and I'll wholeheartedly be supporting it. Thank you.
You, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Jan, I'm wondering if I'm assuming the reason there is a partial 40 still in place is because it's in compliance with the policy and that that specific area didn't meet to be reduced also to 30. Could you advise? Thank you.
Yes, we originally were asked to look at extending the 30s, but what we generally do is have a good look at the area as a whole and see if we can do anything else at the same time. And we did speed readings to see if we could reduce the adjacent limits. And in the cases here, they did meet the criteria of the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to support the application as for the reasons that's already been alluded to. I'm wondering if Jan could would it be possible to, if the local member is minded or is in support, to look at where it's a proposed 40 into a 30, because it seems a very small section of road to go from 30 to 40 back to 30 again.
I think overall, what the proposal does is extend the existing 30 both ways and then insert a 40 at either end, and there's already a 40 in Tattershall. We couldn't justify a 30 on that gap, so the 40 is what we've come up with. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions answered. It's been proposed by the Vice Chairman, seconded by myself, that we adopt it as printed. All in favour, please show now. Thank you, that is unanimous, but I will say, anybody against, any abstentions? No, carried as printed, thank you. Which moves me on to item 4.3, which is A158 at Langworth, revised proposal for the 30 mile an hour speed limit. Again, Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Members may remember that approval was given for a reduction of the existing 40-mile-an-hour speed limit as shown at appendix. It's a bit of a delay, I think. It's still on the Tattershall one. Yeah. Mm. That's it. Thank you. Members may remember that approval was given for us to proceed with the reduction of the existing 40-mile-an-hour limit on the A158 to 30 miles an hour as shown at Appendix A, but they also requested at that time that we investigate further the potential for extending that limit to include the level crossing further west. So we've carried out speed readings and the criteria are met in the vicinity of the crossing for a 30-mile-an-hour limit. So we're now proposing that we consult on the 30-mile-an-hour limit as shown at Appendix B, which includes the level crossing. So this is just an update on that request. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm actually the local member for this area, and 15 years or so ago I was a parish councillor in Langworth as well. In fact, I was the vice chairman of the parish council at the stage. And I know the area well. It did come to committee about a year ago with the piece in the middle. Parish council have registered with me that they would like to be consulted with regard to this. So yes, I'm quite happy for this to come forwards. And based on further investigations, we should accept the report. So I'm quite happy to propose. Vice Chairman seconding. Would anybody like to speak to the application? Seeing none, I will therefore offer it to the meeting. Proposed and seconded as printed. All in favour, please show. Thank you. That is unanimous. But again, I will say against and abstentions. Okay, so that's 4.3. 4.4 is Bishops Road and Deacon Road, proposed no waiting in Lincoln. So again, Jan, when you're ready.
Thank you. So thank you. Deacon Road is situated off Outer Circle Road. It's an industrial area, and concerns have been raised regarding parking in the vicinity of accesses to business units, as shown at Appendix B. The concerns raised are that vehicles are having problems getting in and out of these private drives, and the visibility on exiting them is compromised by parking very close to the junctions. Next slide, please. It's illustrated here by these photographs. So the proposal is to introduce double yellow lines as shown at Appendix B to protect these accesses and the junction with Bishops Road. An objection has been received from one of the local businesses who utilise their own limited private parking for their customers, and the staff are therefore required to park on the street. We note the concern raised, but looking at the area, there are adequate alternative on-street parking arrangements available, and we believe that the restrictions are justified on the basis of safety. We recommend, therefore, that the objection is overruled. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I know this area well. It's one of the two rear entrances to the main Tesco's on Rugby Road. It covers Jewson's, another large retailer, and a lot of other small businesses. There's been quite a large expansion on Bishops Road with regard to industrial units in recent times, and there is more to come. You can see from the layout of the estate that there is more units to come. But the net result of that is the traffic flows around this corner have gone up quite dramatically, I think, over a period of time, and the visibility display on the corner isn't brilliant. So from that point of view, I'm quite happy to support the paper as printed and propose it. Seconded by my Vice Chairman. Would anybody like to speak to the application? No, so therefore I will offer it to the meeting. If you're happy with the paper, please show now. That is unanimous, but I will say anybody against, any abstentions. Thank you. So that one is carried as printed. Next one is 4.5, taking us down to Grantham, and this actually is a place I don't know, Garden Close. So I think we've got the local member wishing to speak to this one, but before we do so, Jan, would you like to introduce the paper, please?
Thank you. So Garden Close is located off Beacon Lane in Grantham. Next slide, please. Oh, that's Deacon Road. Thank you. We're proposing a mixture of double yellow lines and single yellow line following complaints by residents that parking in the vicinity of the junction with Beacon Lane and along Garden Close itself is causing obstruction to flow of traffic and difficulties getting in and out of the junction. There's a number of schools in the vicinity and Grantham College, which generates quite a bit of demand for on-street parking. So the restrictions we've put forward aim to protect the area around the play area and restrict parking to a short section on entering the estate. We have had objections to this on the basis that any parking displaced may end up in private drives, in a private driveway, or with it further into the estate. We're hopeful that maintaining a section for 7 to 8 vehicles on coming into the estate will mitigate this, and are prepared to monitor the situation should these restrictions be introduced. But we're minded to ask the committee to overrule the objection. Thank you.
I think you're still on mute, Councillor Stokes.
Oh, I didn't even hear the chairman ask me to speak, so yes, okay. Thank you. So I speak today in full support of the recommendation. I've been working with residents for 2 years on this scheme. During this time, we've seen a couple of different draft proposals, but I'm delighted that we've reached this position today. I note that an objection is from a resident of 1 to 4. This has been raised with me on a number of occasions, and I believe that signage would be beneficial to them, and I've spoken to officers about this. This TRO is vital for the safety of residents entering and exiting the close, and I know the majority of residents can't wait for these to be in place. So I would urge you to support the officer's recommendation and get these agreed and in place as soon as possible. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Stokes. Having heard what you have to say, and your knowledge is obviously somewhat better than mine, I'm quite happy to take your comments on board, and I will therefore propose the paper. Would anybody like to speak to the paper? Councillor Skinner.
Yes, I agree with the local member. I did work in Grantham for some time. I appreciate the problems there. So I'm quite happy to move or second the paper as well. Thank you.
Thank you. On the basis I've moved it, I will therefore take it as a seconder. Okay, would anybody else like to speak? Seeing nobody, so therefore paper is printed, and obviously we've heard the comments from the local member, proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Skinner. All in favour, please show now. Thank you, that is unanimous, but again I will say anybody against, any abstentions? And it is as we predicted and printed. Thank you. So we now move on to item 4.6, which is Lincoln, Bailgate and Chapel Lane proposed permit parking scheme. So again, if I can ask Jan to introduce this one, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report considers the outcome of the public advertisement of a proposal to introduce a permit scheme in Belgate. And it outlines the course of events that have led us to this point, which began when the City of Lincoln Council, who administer residence parking schemes in Lincoln, asked the County Council to consider an extension to existing residence parking scheme in the periphery of Bailgate. So Appendix A shows the existing schemes, and we applied extensions to Zone 4B and C and introduced new Zone 4G, shown in orange. Now, during the process by which we were introducing these schemes, the City of Lincoln Council came back to us again and asked if we would consider a residence permit scheme within Bailgate area itself. Now, all permit schemes in the county are subject to the County Council's guidance, and one of the principal criteria that must be met is that all residents and businesses must be canvassed to check support for the scheme. So we need a majority of support for any residence parking scheme from those who are likely to be included within it. That exercise was carried out and an overall support was received for the scheme. So we began to develop a scheme for Zone 4H, which is shown at Appendix B. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, given that Belgate comprises a mix of residents and businesses, and most of the vast majority of those residences lie to the north of the junction with Westgate, this scheme applies only to the area, the 32 bays which lie between Westgate and Newport Arch. And rather than replacing existing 1 hour limited waiting bays with bays exclusive to permit holders, the scheme proposes that the existing 32 bays in Bailgate remain available to everyone for a 1 hour stay, but for those with a permit, the vehicle can be left within there for an unlimited period. Next slide, please, Rob. Thank you. So the bays affected in Belgate are the echelon parking to the north and the curbside parking further south. During the consultation for this scheme, the City of Lincoln Council came back to us again and requested that the limited waiting bay in Chapel Lane was included in the scheme. Next slide, please, Rob. Thank you. So Chapel Lane is an additional bay of about 5 spaces, and this was included in the scheme. So now there are 37 parking spaces which are subject to this proposal, and the remaining 41 limited waiting bays in and around the area of Belgate and Westgate and Eastgate remain unchanged. So this revised proposal was advertised last October, and the views expressed in response are detailed in the report, but essentially the residents support the scheme, but the businesses are object to it. So the residents believe it will be a great benefit to them to be able to park close to their properties without being subject to the 1 hour limited waiting. It's been pointed out to us that the allocation of road space to permit holders in 4G on Church Lane and Northgate has removed the option for people in Belgate and Chapel Lane to park on street in those areas. As a result, they have to park some distance from their premises, which is very inconvenient and affects their quality of life. They argue that visitors to Belgate have access to numerous car parks in the area, and that the businesses are not solely reliant on on-street parking within Belgate itself. In objection, the businesses are concerned that changing the base to accommodate permit holders will reduce the overall availability of parking, and that this will result in a loss of trade. They believe that the survival of businesses in Belgate relies on the ability of their customers to be able to park easily and close to these shops and amenities on offer. They state that the proposals threaten the viability of the local businesses, which in turn will undermine Belgate as both a community hub and a tourist destination. Now, given the very polarised response we've had to this scheme, the recommendations, there are three options that we would like the committee to consider in relation to this scheme. They can either proceed with the scheme as advertised, in which case the 37 bays in the northern section of Belgate and Chapel Lane will be available to all for 1 hour, as is the case now, but will also be available to those with permits for an unlimited time. The other option is that they may wish to abandon the scheme on the basis that it's not good for the area or not viable. A third option is provided where the committee may wish that we look again at the elements of the scheme and identify an alternative proposal which may have less potential impact on Belgate's economy and community. Thank you.
Thank you for that balanced introduction and the three options. I'm now going to ask local member Councillor Karen Lee to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Councillor Lee and I'm the local member speaking on behalf of the Bailgate residents this morning. I want to make clear I've also met with representatives of the Bailgate Guild and I do understand the concerns they have over the proposals for residents parking. However, we as a society have to place weight on both economic factors, i.e. what creates economic wealth, but we also have to consider people and the factors which impact on their safety, well-being and everyday lives. I want to begin by describing what difference being able to park near to their own homes would make to local residents. One's a paramedic. She works long shifts and often starts or finishes work at very unsociable times and has to walk some distance to get to her own home in darkness. Another's a cardiac practitioner who's on call on a regular basis. She often has to get to the hospital to assist in life or death procedures at odd times and at short notice, and she walks to work because she hasn't got anywhere to park a car. Another resident is a surgeon. Another's an elderly retired man who had a wonderful shop in Belgate for 25 years, and he wants to see residents parking. Two more are elderly. The first has got dementia and is confused, and the second's disabled, and it's a nightmare for her daily carers to find somewhere to park. Add to those problems everyday issues like trying to drop off your weekly shop or arranging for a tradesman to be able to access your home to complete emergency repairs, and you might start to begin to understand the impact of having no parking near your own home. People who live in many of the streets near to Belgate have all been awarded parking permits, so it's really no wonder the residents I'm representing today feel they are being treated very unfairly for wanting the same. I now want to talk about the level of responses to the consultation. Committee's report states that 59 responses were against the proposals and 33 in support, but these figures are unintentionally misleading. Residents have faced hostility over this issue, and for that reason, one person responded on behalf of a total of 24 Bailgate residents. But that one name remains and the other 23 have been redacted. So in actual fact, because that appears as a single response, the number who actually, residents who supported RPS was 56. Your paper tells you that 59 oppose it, and it's been confirmed to me by officers that only 30% of those 59 responses opposing were from local traders. That equates to 18 local responses against, and 70% of the responses were from visitors who don't even live in the Bailgate, and it doesn't impact upon them as such. So the accurate numbers who live or work in Bailgate are 56 responses in favour and less than 20 opposed. The spaces in option 1, which we'd like you to go for, sit in the residential area of Bailgate close to Newport Arch, and are some distance from where the businesses are located. If you park there and walk forwards until you reach just past Greg's, there's a row of shops which includes Curtis's, and all of these shops have parking spaces directly in front of them, and that includes a spot for disabled visitors, and none of those parking spaces in front of those shops would be affected by option 1. Moving forward towards the Magna Carta pub and turning left at the butcher's close by, all of the businesses just around the corner, there are more parking spaces which wouldn't be included in RPS under option 1, and all those spaces are added to the ones that would be shared by residents and visitors. Last Friday, just after midday, I walked that route and there were 4 empty spaces outside the row of shops, which include Kirsty's, and half a dozen spots empty just around the corner. There are a total of 5 car parks close to the area, and I paid a couple of pounds to park in Westgate car park. I was one of 4 cars in the car park when I arrived, and when I left, I was the only one there. Other car parks I passed walking back to my car all had plenty of available spaces. There is parking there. People's fears for their livelihood are very real, but I'm old enough to remember when Lincoln High Street was pedestrianised in the early 70s. I wasn't very old, but we were told that shops would close as a result, and they didn't. 10 years ago, Lincoln was told that if the bank left the Belgate area, the shopping offer would fail, and it didn't. There's no independent and robust evidence to support the speculative opinion that granting residents the right to share parking spaces with visitors would cause businesses to fail now. And remember, the fact is that alongside visitors, local residents would be sharing those spots. They wouldn't even get them to themselves. We ask you today to dismiss option 2, which refuses the request for RPS, and should your choice be option 3, we'd seek a very robust time frame within which this will be progressed and finalised, because it's been going on since 2017. We sincerely hope that committee will approve option 1, and I'd finish by asking committee to just reflect upon this simple truth. At the end of the day, when the visitors have returned to their own homes, and when the tills have been cashed up and the shopkeepers have returned to their own homes, who's actually left in that area affected by option 1? And the simple answer to that is the local residents, the people I'm representing this morning. Thank you ever so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of them. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I think I'm going to open the debate, and I'm going to express something of an interest. I haven't got a pecuniary interest in this area. Over many years, I've visited many businesses along the Bailgate. I've visited the tourist attractions, the cathedral, the castle, etc. And I've parked in on-street car parking. I've parked in car parks. I've done both. I also have friends in the area, typically further over on Burton Road, not in this specific area, so I haven't been lobbied with regard to this particular area, but and some of those friends do work in the NHS and such areas, the sort of people you've been talking about, Councillor Lee, and they also tell me about issues with regard to parking outside of their houses, and it's true of a lot of locations in Lincoln. A lot of people want to come to the town into locations where the Lincoln is a nucleus, and you get these little hotspots where people want to visit them, and they produce these issues with regard to car parking. So I don't know. I've also visited some of the pubs and, dare I say, hotels in the area. I'll leave it as simply as that at various times of day and night. You know, I'm quite familiar with the area. I'm fairly amenable with regard to how this application goes forward. I've received various phone calls from traders, from individuals in this area of the last few weeks, and I've listened to them, but I don't believe any of those comments that I've listened to preclude me from chairing this item and dealing with this item as an item of debate. So I'm therefore going to open the debate to the meeting and point to my Vice Chairman for his first comments.
Thank you. I've got some questions really before I moved to comment, and I don't know whether it's possible to answer them, but I think it would be helpful if we could. I'd like to, for a start, understand where people that live in Bailgate currently park now, because appreciating that this isn't these are people that are currently living in Bailgate. They currently, I assume, have cars. They are currently parking them somewhere. We've heard that they've got to walk some distance to their cars. I'd just be interested to know how far and where they're parking. I'm also noting that this original request came through from the City of Lincoln. And not living in Lincoln, I'm not as familiar with the, I mean, I do park in the car parks up the top of the hill and have done, but I haven't paid sufficient attention to be able to know whether the City of Lincoln Council offers any kind of season ticket or permit scheme in their car parks, just to better understand whether you know, there is car parking in that part of Lincoln and how far it is away from Bailgate. And I'd also be interested to know, and I may have missed it, how many residents, how many households we're talking about in this part of Lincoln, and also if we could have just remind me of the figure of how many spaces we are talking about making available for this permit scheme, please.
Thank you. So residents, a number of the residents have had their own private arrangements for parking. I believe there's an arrangement with the Methodist Church on Belgate where people can buy a permit to park within their car park. And other residents were aware that they do have their own means of parking, and some have actually said that they will retain that whether or not the scheme goes in, because they're not 100% sure they will always get a parking space within that scheme. If they don't have that arrangement, they're forced to park possibly further up Newport and off the streets off Newport because of the existing residents parking stock, which has now sort of infiltrated the whole immediate periphery of Belgate. So they are having to park some distance away if they don't have alternative arrangements. The City of Lincoln Council, they have concessions for existing permit holders, I believe, whereby they can utilise those car parks at quieter periods, so in the evenings or on Sundays. They get access to the local car parks using their residence permit. And in terms of number of properties, permits and spaces, there are approximately 50 properties in this scheme eligible for permits, and they're entitled to 2 each. So that's potentially 100 permits out there competing for 37 spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's really, really helpful. I mean, personally, I do have some serious concerns with this proposal, not least that the 37 spaces available seems incredibly limiting, given the number of potential users, the number of potential cars, and appreciating that this is one of the prime tourist areas of Lincoln, indeed of Lincolnshire, that the potential of all of these parking spaces, which I appreciate would be in theory available for people to still use on the 1 hour basis, would in fact be taken up wholly or nearly wholly by people parking their cars in there on a full-time basis. It doesn't seem to be a scheme which is going to solve enough of the problem. And it's a problem which, I mean, I appreciate it's difficult for the people that are living there, but it feels to me that there are probably other solutions out there which the City of Lincoln Council might be able to help with. I can understand the concern of businesses in this part of Lincoln, seeing those short stay car parking places, the places where people pop in and pop into their shop, being taken up on a full-time basis by people leaving their cars there, residents leaving their cars there, and having to go and find somewhere else further away from those shops to park. But I'll listen to the rest of the debate before I come down one way or the other.
I also register the nighttime economy, whereby a lot of people go to various eateries establishments along the Bale If you have an event on in the castle, as an example, there's a lot often in the summer open air concerts, and you might have 1,000 or 2,000 people turn up. I don't know how many people turn up in a car or whatever mode of transport they use, but certainly the car parking around the top end of Lincoln is very precious on those occasions. And I think that's potentially more of a pinch point when you get an event on in the castle, which, believe it or not, is county council owned and run. So, you know, we are all semi-responsible for that activity as councillors. But, you know, there is that activity there. Along this stretch of the Bailgate, there are various hotels. And some of those hotels do have rear entrances and do have car parking to the rear. So I don't think with regard to the hotels and the overnight spacing there, it affects it. But certainly with regard to the permits and permit holders being able to park for unlimited periods in the day and potentially park overnight, it produces the pinch point. So there's the two conflicts there. Anyway, I'll move on to Councillor Ashley Morris next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's massively important that we get this absolutely right. Would it be possible to arrange to go up and look? Because, I mean, I'm familiar with Bailgate in that I go up to the Christmas market and trot down it, but I don't really look in an objective way. Would it be possible for us to have a brief site visit? I fully appreciate there's been massive delays on this, obviously COVID related, and a short while longer. Perhaps I really do think it's important we get this right. I feel we're not going to satisfy everyone. We're going to be on a damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I would appreciate a look because, as I say, we don't, if we're up there shopping, objectively do so. So is that possible?
So it is feasible that we could defer this item and go and have a look ourselves. I look at how many members there are, and if everyone was to drive up individually, we would take up nearly a third of the car parking provision on the Bailgate at any one time. If there's 37 cars and we've got typically a dozen members plus officers, etc., we would use most of the car parking spaces to do such a function. So it may be difficult to do so. So it's a possibility. So I will move on to my next speaker, and that will be Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And it's a partial personal interest because I do have a blue badge, and this is in relation to other individuals who have a blue badge rather than myself, because I don't tend to frequent Lincoln very often for various reasons, because it's the other end to myself, and usually I use online shopping for various things for ease. Jan, you mentioned that there's an hour limit for those who aren't residents. Does the hour limit also apply to those who have blue badges, or do they have a longer period of time?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Blue badge holders are entitled to use limited waiting bays for an unlimited period anyway, so the 1 hour doesn't apply. Similarly, with residents' parking bays in Lincoln, they are exempt from those bays. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I would be supportive of your suggestion that we defer this. I agree a site visit would be unwieldy in many respects, but for us as individuals, I mean, I know the area, but not in enough detail. I think that's the problem. That stretch of Belgate is probably one that I wouldn't ever walk or drive on. And I've actually learnt more by looking on Google Maps than I have on this map here in front of us. So, you know, I'm sympathetic to residents. And there's nothing worse than, you know, having other people parking in the only place that you can reasonably access. So, you know, I really would like to see this for myself. Now I've heard the arguments. It's one thing reading it on paper, but to hear the arguments is not the same. And that's, You know, that's what I would like to do, please. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple of speakers still. Councillor Carrington, please.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Yes, there are clearly very passionate views held on this matter on both sides of the argument, and I'd really like to start by just reminding ourselves of the space that we're talking about, what kind of a place it is, because Uphill Lincoln, the Belgate area, the Cathedral Quarter as it's sometimes called, really is the vibrant heart of what we all believe is our great city. And within that, there are a very wide range of different kinds of business. There's obviously retail. Chairman, you've mentioned cafes, bars. We have some hotels, perhaps with their own parking. There's a lot of different kinds of businesses, but the thing that unifies pretty well all of them is that they all rely on visiting customers. And if they don't have visiting customers, they're going to suffer. And I think the range of objectors that we've had to this proposal should give us pause. It is not just local shopkeepers. We have, for example, a strong objection from the tourism authorities, and that is something which I think we should give very, very serious weight to. On the basis of what I have heard so far, I am minded to accept that if this proposal goes ahead, it will do damage, potentially serious damage, to the businesses in the Vale. I note the comparison Councillor Lee made with High Street being changed many years ago. I do not think it is directly comparable. This is a much smaller, much more discrete area, and I think the pattern of use in this area is one where people need to be able to get in, get out with as little hassle as possible, because if they have hassle, they will quite simply go elsewhere. Our town centres are under a great deal of stress as it is. Basically, at the moment, you have a relatively freely circulating visitor cohort. If this goes ahead, we're going to have a situation where either they will be searching for a space, probably unsuccessfully, or tensely looking over their shoulders for enforcement officers. And I think we have to remember this is a mixed area. Yes, there is residential. Yes, there is retail. It is mixed. It has been mixed for a very long time. If you go back to those circles in the road that indicate where the forum was, it's been mixed for about 2,000 years. There may have been a bit of a gap in the middle. Fundamentally, you don't move to the Belgate, and when I moved to Lincolnshire decades ago, it's one of the places we looked. You don't move to the Belgate without knowing what you're getting into. And yes, if you're in a mixed area, it is awkward. But if we only favour one group at the expense of all those other groups, in other words, we don't have a mixed solution, well, then I think we are disadvantaging people and potentially doing so very seriously. What we need is a compromise. I'm a little surprised at the City Council's timing on this. I recognise they're responding to residents' pleas, but I have to say that the last 2 years have been the most seriously stressful for any business, particularly businesses relying on street traffic, in most of our lifetimes because of the pandemic. And I think just as we hope we're moving out of it to hit traders with this, I can understand that those traders may not, the viewpoint that they're coming from. And it does seem to me the danger here is that in trying to ease the situation to a degree for residents, we are going to hammer local enterprise, we're going to hammer local jobs, and we're going to hammer local prosperity. And I think it is illuminating to note the comment in the report on page 43 that when invited by our own officers to consider some form of scheme for free short-term parking where people could demonstrate they'd made a shop purchase, the City Council did not agree to pursue that. The City Council is known to be very reliant on two primary sources of income, parking and the crematorium, and I fear that that may have been part of their thinking. Chairman, the final point I'd make is to the residents. I have experience of living in an area before I came to Lincolnshire in London where residents parking was introduced, and indeed at the time it was the only one where, albeit briefly, that scheme was removed, and I was part of the committee that got that achieved. We were told it would free up parking for us. We were told it would keep outsiders out, commuters in this case it's shoppers. We were told all sorts of things which did not come to pass. There was a tremendous reduction in the number of available spaces. There was very aggressive enforcement. Bluntly, we didn't get what we were promised, and I fear that the residents of the Vale wouldn't get it either. Chairman, I think balance in this matter is vital, and I think that this would be so damaging for business that I really question whether it should go ahead. I will listen carefully to colleagues, but at the moment I'm much minded to support option 2. Thank you, Chairman.
So I don't think there's anything for Jan to respond to there. So I'll move on to Councillor Sear. Noise Sear, please.
Well, I travel out of country. In London, they have residential parking, even in York. So the business not lost, because if you look at this way, plenty car park around Lincoln. If you drop the car going for 1 hour, how much you got to spend in the shop? That's not the point. The point is, resident, you should have like a permit for resident. Then depend how long. Of course, people don't want to walk far from the shop. I agree with that. So am I. I don't do walking. But if you put car in the car park, you have to walk more, then you spend more time in retail than outside the shop. Nobody cannot park outside your house if you have to get up on emergency. You live other side of the road, long way, so you're not attendant to emergency. So I don't think, you have to think very carefully. Retail warehousing, no parking. It is plenty parking in Lincoln. Plenty parking in Lincoln, believe me. I not come from Lincoln, but I learn now I can find the parking in Lincoln. Depend what you do. So I think, you have to think carefully. In York, you have pay parks and line. I've been to York yesterday. No parking in York. Except residential or disabled or the children. That's it. So there you go. That's what I think anyhow.
Thank you for your comments. I'll now go to Vice Chairman again, please.
Thank you. I tend to agree with effectively everything that Councillor Carrington has said and put incredibly eloquently. The concerns which I fleshed out a few moments ago. It really does feel, if you're going to put a resident car park anywhere, it's not on the frontage of one of our prestigious yes. It just feels if you were going to put this kind of resident car park, would you put it on the Bailgate in Lincoln, inside the Newport Arch, with those businesses, with those shops, and effectively allow people to fill all of those 37 spaces on a full-time or next to full-time basis? If you've got 100 people, if you've got potentially 100 permits competing for 37 spaces, I can't foresee many of these spaces being left for disabled visitors, for regular visitors. We can't. I just cannot see these spaces being left available for visitors and shoppers. The only area which restrains me from going for option 2. I mean, my point is, I feel that the Bailgate section of this really isn't acceptable, and it's whether there is further work that could identify somewhere that, and I suppose there's a question for our officers, is whether, if further work was done, would it be possible to incorporate to include the residents in this part of Lincoln in the parking schemes that already operate on the periphery? Would it be possible? I appreciate that they're probably already at a premium, but the 37 spaces are going to be at a serious premium, whether those people could be included in the existing permit scheme further out. I mean, if they were, I'd be prepared to support looking at that, but I don't think I could support turning Bailgate into resident parking.
Committee and others that, okay, if you were to adopt a more stringent parking zone around the Bail, you would then encourage displacement of whatever vehicles there are there, and they would have to go somewhere. So slightly further over you have the Burton Road shopping area and people walking down from Burton Road towards Raisin Lane and the Castle area coming into town. Further over on the Newport Road, you have the Bishop Grot College, which is part of the university, double yellow lines down a lot of it. So where do you actually displace these people to? The problem we have is we have a very small space in which people can park, and it becomes a real issue. So how would it actually fit within regard to, if we were to introduce a scheme, where would the displacement go? So that really fits on the back of where Tom's coming from. Can you respond, please, Jan?
Thank you. Yeah. Firstly, just going back to points raised, that the scheme does appear to be unviable when you consider there are potentially 100 permits competing for 37 spaces. However, in my experience, existing schemes, rarely there is 100% take-up of permits because there is a cost to them. And also, it's likely that many of those permit holders would be away during the day at work, so they won't be taking up those spaces. Now, if we were to go for option 3, I would be looking to perhaps reassess the whole of the residence parking stock in the area and how it works, and whether or not we can amalgamate areas or extend areas or make it a broader scheme. I would also revisit the City of Lincoln Council to see if they can come up with any, well, we can come up together with any solutions with utilising their car parks. Or I think we can just reassess the whole parking stock in the area with a view to trying to accommodate those residents in Chapel Street and Bailgate in some form or another. Thank you.
How do you feel about going on a site visit? Do you have an opinion with regard to that?
I'm happy to do a site visit, yeah.
Could facilitate that for us.
Yeah.
So, how would the committee like to go? We've really got two options. I think one is the suggestion that was put forward by Councillor Mrs Ashley Morris and seconded by Councillor Mrs Austin, that we went on a site visit. And the other option would be to potentially, well, there's all sorts of ways. There's the other three options up for grabs, but nobody has come up with a clear way forwards with regard to any one of them. Councillor Carrington.
Yeah, Chairman, as our colleagues from further away from Lincoln were speaking, I realised that although I was speaking as someone who lives, barely a mile from the site we're talking about, I'm very familiar with it. This is a very, very large county indeed, and I would be uncomfortable proposing any solution if I felt that any colleague on this committee was not sufficiently familiar, that they didn't feel confident making the decision. I appreciate the logistics problems of doing it, but I wouldn't like to disadvantage any colleague before we make what is a very important determination.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I've been listening to both sides of the debate, and one thing is abundantly clear: in order to have a scheme that works, or even decide whether we bring in a scheme, we need to look at some further work, and which would be item 3. But amongst that other work, we'd also need to have a site visit so we understand what we're actually getting ourselves roped into. Because first two items, you can't support either of those without further work, I'm afraid, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. A lot's been made of, and quite rightly, of those that come sort of further afield to Lincoln. It's not actually just those. A number of months ago now, a good friend of mine who actually lives in Lincoln, actually to get to the centre of Lincoln, had to park quite some way away with a friend who has a sort of a permit, as a visitor's permit, if you will, and then walk from there. So it's not just those who come further afield, say from say my division, for example. It's actually people in Lincoln who are on the outskirts of Lincoln. Even they are struggling to actually park in the Bailgate. And certainly from my perspective, and certainly a lot of people I know, if you've got to walk some considerable distance and you're carrying many items that eventually will get heavy, you'll just go, oh, I'm not dealing with it. If I can't park relatively close, I'll do it online, or I'll do it in another manner that has less hindrance and is more convenient. I certainly agree with councillors. I know the area very well that's being discussed, but I appreciate some may not. So I would certainly support a site visit before a decision's made, because I think it helps to sort of see it on the ground organically, rather than when you're driving and you're looking for a space yourself. You're sort of focusing on driving and watching where you can park, rather than being on the ground and watching from a standing position. But no, I'd support that, Chairman. Thank you.
So, having listened to the committee hold with the various opinions, and listened to the traffic officer, there has been a suggestion that there is a little bit of work that might be outstanding with regard to City Council and some things that could be updated. So I'm going to potentially propose to the meeting an alternate proposal, and that is that we go for option 3, which is agree to further work to identify means by which a scheme might be introduced, which might have impact on the economy. But before the committee actually sees this one back again, that we actually conduct a site visit along this area so that we can be absolutely sure. It is the jewel in the crown of Lincolnshire. It is the precinct with regard to the cathedral. There's a lot riding with regard to the castle. There's a lot riding with regard to the visitor economy. But there's also the local people that actually live in the area. And indeed, some of I'm not trying to sound insulting, the shopkeepers, some of the shopkeepers actually live in the vicinity and actually walk to work from within. Not every shopkeeper lives away from this location. So there is a whole lot of other influence within it. So I'm going to propose that we went for option 3, but with the proviso that we had a site visit before we actually viewed it back at committee. Councillor Pepper.
Chairman, thank you for that. I've sat here quiet because I don't know the area particularly well, and I would have been uneasy about making a recommendation on the options there today. In fact, I don't know the area particularly well, because I've got 5 cities where I live at the south of the county as close to this, or even closer than Lincoln itself. So I was torn. I could see the committee was torn between a site visit and further thoughts on the matter. So you actually beat me to it. So I'm more than happy to second your recommendation.
I'm just conscious of the fact that, as an example, when I visit York, you drive into York, and the first thing you do when you get to York is you hit the one-way system, and if you get the wrong side of the one-way system in York, it's very much a nightmare. But then when you've done it, you're driving around thinking, well, I want to be at this end of town, and I can't be. So you're going around the one-way system and then thinking, well, I want to park, and then you're looking for any sort of parking, be it a pay and display, be it on street, whatever, and it is so acutely short, and that's before you even consider any residents in that location. So I think we just need to be very careful about how we deal with Lincoln and Lincoln's future. It is in our hands. We do need to be sure that we deal with everybody as well as we can. Okay, so proposed and seconded that we do option 3 with a site visit before we see it back at committee. All in favour, please show now. That is unanimous. Thank you. Well, that's quite interesting considering we've had so many different opinions with regard to where we might or might not go. But thank you. It's an interesting debate, and thank you, Councillor Lee, for coming today. Okay, so that is item 4.6. So we'll now have a quick pause while we move over and do a change in officers. Thank you, Jan, for producing that report. It's very much appreciated. Thank you for every report you produce, having said that. But certainly, you know, some of them are a little bit more sensitive than others. Okay, so if we're all ready to start then, I don't know, we're one person down at the moment, but I think they left part of the way through the last debate, so I think we're ready to go. So item 5.1 is the application at Jerusalem Road, Skellingthorpe. Neil?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this relates to an application that was first brought to the committee almost exactly a year ago, with a recommendation that planning permission be granted subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement related to routing for an animal rendering plant at Skellingthorpe. However, during that time, we've had difficulty with the applicant in terms of getting them to agree to complete the Section 106 agreement. And given that it's coming up to a year anniversary before since the resolution was made, we put it to the applicant that if they were not in a position to complete the Section 106 agreement to make the development acceptable, then we would bring a report back to the planning committee with a recommendation for refusal based on the fact that they would not enter into the Section 106 agreement. And that was the purpose of this paper. To give you an update, at the 11th hour on Friday, I received communication from the applicant's agent to indicate that they are now prepared to complete the Section 106 agreement, and the completed paperwork for the Section 106 was forwarded to me and our legal services department on Friday afternoon. We're now content that the Section 106 is completed in a way that enables the planning permission to be released. So my advice to the committee this morning is that we no longer need to consider this report, given that we have now received the Section 106 agreement and we are able to fulfil the resolution of the committee from 15th of February 2021. So on that basis, I'm asking that the report is withdrawn from the meeting this morning, Chairman.
Thank you. It's a shame that we have to get so close to actually dealing with it the day before the report's actually dealt with for the applicant to come back and confirm all the details. So my attitude to this is, yes, I'm quite happy to accept your comments that we don't need to deal with this. However, if there is a change in scenario, situation, I think we do need to be looking to look at this application or look at the situation again. So if the committee are quite happy to accept that, thank you. Okay, so we'll therefore move to item 6.1, which is the outcome of the planning appeal. The supplementary reports here, it's County Matters B200474. So when you're ready for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it was obviously a time, because this application was also brought to the 15th of February Committee 2021. The committee had a resolution to refuse the application. It relates to a proposal for an amendment to a condition to an existing planning permission. The paper was brought to the committee as, say, 15th of February 2021. The application was refused and the applicant subsequently appealed that decision. The procedures we have here at the County Council are that in those circumstances the outcome of that appeal is brought back and reported to the committee. So the paper here this morning is just to inform you of the outcome of the appeal, that the appeal was allowed and there was a partial award of costs against the County Council in terms of the inspector's decision on this appeal. So it's just for you to note the decision and there's no further action required. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So this isn't a debate, it's just here for us as a committee to note. So if you're quite happy to note, thank you. Councillor Mrs Austin, you want to speak to it?
I would just like to point out that, of course, I don't represent this. This isn't my division, but it's not far from the boundary. Anyone living in the south of the Boston area will never forget the horrendous fire there was in Curtin quite a few years ago, relating to tyres being stored in a huge, huge pile out close to the current A16. And we do not want a repetition of that. So I can only trust that the planning officers, the inspectors report really understands that situation, but I appreciate that we go with the inspector's decision. Thank you.
Thank you. So therefore that's noted by committee. Nobody else wishing to speak, so therefore we have dealt with that item. So therefore it brings me at 11:48 to close the meeting. Wish you all a safe journey home, and I hope you all stay healthy. Enjoy the rest of your day.